Have you ever felt a particular kind of emptiness that doesn't scream or cry? It's not a sharp pain, but a quiet, persistent hum in the background of your life. A feeling you've lived with for so long. You might have forgotten it's not supposed to be there. You can function with it, succeed with it, even smile convincingly through it. But underneath everything, something feels just a little bit off, like you're watching your own life from a distance. You might not remember when it started. There was no single event, no dramatic collapse. It feels more like something essential was never fully built in the first place. What happens to a child who grows up without feeling deeply, consistently loved, not necessarily neglected in obvious ways, or abused in ways that leave physical scars, but unseen, unheld, unmirrored? What happens when comfort is rare, affection is conditional, and emotional safety is something you learn not to expect? Here's the paradox. Many people who weren't loved enough as children become remarkably capable adults. They're responsible, independent, and emotionally controlled. Often, they become the ones everyone else relies on. So why does closeness still feel dangerous? Why does praise make you uncomfortable? Why does being truly seen trigger anxiety instead of relief? You might tell yourself you're just guarded, or introverted, or self-sufficient. But what if that strength isn't the whole story? What if the independence you're proud of was learned out of necessity, not choice? A child who can rely on love learns something else instead. Self-containment. They learn how not to need, how not to ask, how not to expect. They learn to regulate themselves before anyone teaches them how. And that skill works incredibly well until adulthood arrives. Because adult life doesn't just require competence. It requires intimacy, vulnerability, and the ability to receive, not hust hibe. So what happens when the part of you that was supposed to learn how to receive love never had the chance? Why does affection feel undeserved? Why does reassurance feel temporary? And why, despite everything you've achieved, does a quiet question still surface in moments of silence? What if something essential was missing, and I build my entire personality around surviving without it? That question isn't a sign of weakness. It's a signal. And once you start to follow it, you see that the effects of not being loved as a child don't just disappear with age. They evolve. The deepest damage caused by not being loved enough isn't just emotional pain. A child doesn't interpret absence like an adult does. They don't think, my caregivers are limited or this environment is emotionally poor. Instead, the child draws a far more dangerous conclusion. Love must be earned, or it doesn't come at all. From that moment, the psyche reorganizes itself around adaptation. Quietly, efficiently, you learn what keeps you safe. You learn what gets attention and what must be hidden. Most importantly, you learn what not to need. Psychologically, this creates an internal self-sufficiency loop. The child becomes emotionally autonomous too early. Comfort is self-generated. Longing is suppressed because expressing it leads nowhere. This isn't a failure of resilience. It's resilience overused. The psychoanalyst Carl Jung spoke about this when he described the false self, the personality that develops to meet the demands of the environment rather than the needs of the soul. When love is unreliable, the false self becomes competent and controlled. It learns to perform stability. But there's a cost. The parts of you that were meant to be shaped by warmth like trust, receptivity, and emotional spontaneity remain underdeveloped. Not broken, just untrained. So as an adult you may appear strong, but internally feel brittle. Praise doesn't land. Reassurance fades quickly. Affection feels conditional, even when it isn't. Well, because your nervous system learned early that closeness is inconsistent, and the body remembers what the mind has normalized. This is where many people misunderstand themselves. They assume they're distant because they prefer it, or that they don't need reassurance because they're secure. But often, what looks like preference is actually early resignation. The psyche learned that wanting too much leads to disappointment, so it narrowed desire and lowered the emotional volume. And this strategy worked especially in childhood. But adulthood changes the rules. Adult relationships don't just ask you to function. They ask you to receive, to believe affection can be stable, to trust that care won't vanish. And this is where the hidden problem reveals itself. Not being loved as a child didn't make you incapable of love. It taught you how to survive without it. The consequences of not being loved enough as a child rarely announce themselves as sadness. They surface as patterns. Patterns in how you relate, in what you tolerate, and in what you quietly expect from life. One of the first places this shows up is in your emotional calibration. You don't overreact, but you also don't fully respond. Joy feels muted, and disappointment feels familiar. You live in the middle range of feeling, not because you're balanced, but because intensity once felt unsafe. This is called emotional narrowing. When the nervous system grows up without reliable comfort, it learns to conserve emotional energy. High hope becomes risky, and deep attachment becomes costly. So the mind chooses moderation, not out of wisdom, but out of protection. Another consequence appears in relationships. You might find yourself drawn to people who are distant, unavailable, or inconsistent, not because you enjoy being deprived, but because your nervous system recognizes the rhythm. Familiarity masquerades as attraction. When stable love is offered freely, it can feel suspicious or undeserved. Our own brains can reinforce this. A cognitive bias called confirmation bias means we seek evidence that supports our existing beliefs. If you unconsciously believe love fades, you will notice every withdrawal more than every moment of care. Neutral moments feel threatening, and silence feels loaded. Over time, this shapes your identity. You become the strong one, the independent one who doesn't ask for much, and society rewards this. Emotional self-sufficiency is praised. Needlessness is mistaken for maturity. So no one questions the cost. But internally, something feels off. You may struggle to feel deeply known, even when you're seen. Compliments slide off you. Intimacy feels exposing rather than nourishing. Neurologically, this makes sense. Early emotional neglect affects how the brain processes safety and connection. The systems responsible for trust and bonding remain cautious, always scanning for withdrawal. This is why many adults who lacked love as children don't feel damaged. They feel tired. Tired of managing themselves. Tired of not needing. Tired of holding everything together without ever fully resting in someone else's care. The tragedy isn't that life becomes unbearable. It's that it becomes manageable, but smaller. And the longer this goes unexamined, the more it feels like personality instead of history. Breaking free doesn't begin with trying to heal your past. That idea sounds comforting, but it often keeps people stuck. The real prison isn't what happened to you. It's what you learn to stop expecting. Most people who weren't loved enough as children don't need to become softer. They need to become more demanding, not of voters, but of reality itself. The rebellion begins the moment you question a belief you've never consciously examined. If I need too much, I will lose people. That belief once kept you safe. Now, it keeps you small. So instead of trying to open up in dramatic ways, the shift starts quieter and far more radically. You begin by allowing discomfort in the presence of care. You let compliments linger instead of deflecting them. You stay when someone is consistent instead of searching for flaws. You resist the urge to earn affection through usefulness or emotional restraint. This will feel wrong at first, not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. Your nervous system mistakes unfamiliar safety for danger. So the work isn't forcing connection. It's tolerating stability long enough for your body to learn that it doesn't disappear. Another crucial shift is reclaiming need without shame. You don't announce it loudly or justify it. You simply allow yourself to want and to be seen wanting. This dismantles the false identity built in childhood, the one who survives without asking, and slowly, something changes. You stop proving your low maintenance. You stop minimizing your emotional footprint. You stop confusing self-erasure with strength. The rebellion isn't dramatic. It won't look impressive from the outside. But internally, it's profound. Every time you allow yourself to be cared for without trying to control it, you rewrite a rule that once defined your entire life. The most painful truth is not that you were unloved. It's that you learned to live as if love were optional. Not because you believed that, but because believing otherwise hurt too much. So you adapted. You became capable, contained, independent, and the world mistook this adaptation for strength. But strength was never the goal. Wholeness was. Here's the realization that reframes everything. You did not grow up too strong. You grew up and unsupported systems don't fail, they compensate. The part of you that feels distant, self-sufficient, or emotionally muted is not broken. It is overworked. It carried more than it was meant to for far too long. Love was not supposed to be something you earned through self-control. Connection was not supposed to feel like a risk. The healing doesn't come from revisiting every wound. It comes from allowing yourself to be shaped now by consistency, by care, by presence that doesn't ask you to disappear in order to stay. The final truth is this: you were never difficult to love. You were simply taught not to expect it. And the moment you stop organizing your life around that lesson, something quiet but irreversible happens. You don't become someone new. You become someone unfinished who is finally allowed to continue. If this resonated with you, know that you are not alone. It's okay to seek support, and talking to a mental health professional can be an incredible step toward understanding these patterns. Thank you for watching. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.